Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When I inherited my grandfather's secluded lakefront haven, I expected peace. What I got was a war, with a power-hungry HOA president, fake volunteers, arson, and a courtroom showdown. This isn't just a story about land, it's about reclaiming your right to live free. When my grandfather passed away, he left me something far more valuable than money or heirlooms. A piece of serenity tucked away on the edge of Lake Evermere. 6 acres of private wooded shoreline, complete with an old but sturdy house, a creaky wooden dock, a tiny guest cabin, and a view that would make poets weep. I was 38 and burnt out from years in the tech industry, so I packed up my life in Denver, quit my job, and headed straight to what I thought would be peace on earth. I arrived with a truckload of essentials, a toolbox, and a heart ready for quiet. The house had good bones. The front porch sagged just enough to feel nostalgic, and the interior smelled like cedar and dust. My grandfather had kept it in good shape, and though there was work to do, new wiring, stronger fencing, a few roof tiles to replace, it was livable, even charming. The first thing I did was install a security system. Not because I was worried, but because Grandpa always said, "Trust nature, not neighbors." Smart man. I mounted cameras discreetly around the house and set up motion sensors along the tree line and dock. Then I walked the perimeter, noting every inch of my land. It wasn't just a house, it was a retreat, a border between the real world and mine. What I didn't know, however, was that my private oasis was right next to a ticking time bomb in yoga pants. Lake Harmony, a newer HOA-controlled development, sat just beyond my north fence line. Rows of beige, nearly identical homes with trimmed hedges and manicured mailboxes hugged the lakeshore like a picket-fenced cult. I barely noticed them at first, beyond the fact that the occasional jogger or dog walker passed by my road with suspicious curiosity. But within days, I started seeing the same woman hovering along the edge of my property. Mid-50s, stiff posture, hair that hadn't moved since the Reagan era, tablet in hand like a badge of authority. The type who looked like she'd issue citations for lawn offenses. She introduced herself as Karen Sparrow, president of the Lake Harmony Homeowners Association. I didn't need to ask her title. She offered it the moment we locked eyes. Her first words weren't hello or welcome, but a firm. "Do you have permits for your fencing and surveillance equipment?" I blinked. "It's private property. I don't need your permits." Her eyes narrowed like I'd just insulted the Constitution. It wasn't long before I found anonymous flyers on my mailbox suggesting I join the community efforts to preserve shoreline access. One morning, I caught a man in a Lake Harmony windbreaker trying to photograph my dock. When confronted, he claimed he was documenting environmental encroachments. I knew then that my peaceful dream had a name, and that name was Karen. The first visit from the police came exactly 5 days after I moved in. I was on the back deck sipping coffee and planning out which part of the property to tackle next. Replace the rusted hinges on the boat shed, maybe clean the leaves out of the gutters, when I saw the cruiser pull up my gravel driveway. The officers stepped out, their expressions unreadable, and one of them, Officer Diaz, called out, "Sir, we received a report of potential squatting on this property. May we speak with you?" I blinked, momentarily stunned. "Squatting?" I asked, approaching calmly, mug still in hand. "I own this property." He held up a clipboard. "We've been informed that the property is supposed to be vacant. The caller claimed it had been abandoned, and someone may have broken in." I raised my brow, then invited them to the porch table and laid out everything. My driver's license, the deed, the will from my grandfather, the tax assessments, utility, transfer documents, every shred of proof that I was, beyond all doubt, the lawful owner. Officer Diaz flipped through the pages with visible boredom, clearly realizing this wasn't going anywhere. He gave a nod of reluctant approval, apologized for the inconvenience, and left. I shrugged it off. A simple mistake, I told myself. Except it happened again. 1 week later, same driveway, same cruiser, this time different officers. New faces, same line. We've had another report that someone's unlawfully occupying the property. I didn't even bother with the surprise act. I handed over the same documentation folder and asked if this was going to be a weekly thing. They too apologized and left, but now my curiosity was piqued. I asked if they could tell me who filed the complaint. They wouldn't. Privacy laws, they said, but the younger officer's eyes flicked involuntarily toward the Lake Harmony development when I pressed him. That was all the confirmation I needed. The third time, I was ready. 2 weeks in, and this time the officer looked downright embarrassed. "Look, I'm sorry, Mr. Bryce. We've had multiple reports. We're obligated to respond, but your name's in the system now. This shouldn't keep happening." I nodded politely and asked if the calls were coming from Karen Sparrow. His jaw clenched. He didn't answer. Over the course of 2 months, I counted 9 visits, 9 patrols. Each time, same dance. I'd show my documents, the officers would mumble apologies, and I'd watch them head back to their cruiser like tired mall cops on loop. What infuriated me wasn't just the interruptions, it was the tone of the complaints. Suspicious male spotted near dock. Unknown man entering vacant residence. Possible trespasser installing surveillance equipment. It was all designed to paint me as a threat, a shadowy figure lurking on land that had been mine since the ink dried on the inheritance. It became obvious that Karen wasn't just nosy, she was determined. This wasn't about misunderstanding or caution. This was a calculated campaign to make my life hell, and she was using the police as her personal enforcement squad. What she didn't realize, though, was that every report, every patrol car, every question about my legitimacy was strengthening my case. I kept records. I logged badge numbers. I installed extra cameras. If she wanted a war over my land, I'd give her one, with receipts. I thought the police visits were as far as she'd go. I thought the passive-aggressive flyers and sideways glances from Lake Harmony residents were the extent of her crusade. I was wrong. It started with a small blurb in the Lake Harmony community newsletter, tucked between announcements about bake sales and HOA gardening guidelines. Concerns have been raised about an unidentified individual occupying private shoreline adjacent to our community. Residents are advised to avoid contact until further clarification is provided. It didn't mention me by name, of course, but it didn't have to. My land was the only one on that stretch of lake not included in the HOA map, and everyone knew who had recently moved in. It was passive-aggressive slander with plausible deniability. Then came the article. A local online blog run by a so-called community advocate published a full write-up titled, "Who is the Man on the Lake? Residents worry over security, dogs, and drones." The author, Karen Sparrow. She didn't even bother hiding it. She framed herself as a concerned neighbor, referencing multiple police visits, surveillance equipment pointed at community property, and erratic, aggressive behavior. She even claimed I was keeping large guard dogs and had blocked access to historically public shoreline. It was a hit piece. A carefully constructed bit of fiction wrapped in fear-mongering and HOA jargon, and it spread like wildfire. I woke up the next day to find comments under the post, some vague, some vile. Why isn't the city doing anything? Maybe we need to organize and take the property back. Someone even posted a blurry photo of me carrying lumber across my yard, captioned, "Proof he's building something unpermitted." I was furious, but not surprised. Karen had escalated. The police hadn't worked, so now she was dragging my name through the mud, trying to spark outrage and force me out through sheer social pressure. I was being painted as a threat to the neighborhood, a dangerous outsider occupying their lake. The irony, of course, was that my property had been here decades before Lake Harmony even existed. But in her version of the truth, I was an invader, a villain in her suburban soap opera. That's when I made a decision. Enough was enough. I retained a legal firm out of state, sharp, aggressive attorneys who didn't care about HOA politics or local whispers. We filed formal complaints with the police department, citing abuse of emergency services and repeated false reports. We sent a cease and desist letter to the Lake Harmony HOA and to Karen personally, demanding the removal of defamatory content and a public retraction. And then I filed 2 civil suits, one for defamation and reputational damage, and one for harassment and targeted emotional distress. I also met with the sheriff's office in person, sat down with the deputy chief. I explained everything, from the inheritance to the harassment to the blog post. I showed them call logs, footage, screenshots, even the flyers. I asked just one thing. Would you tolerate this if it were your land? The silence that followed told me they finally saw it for what it was. Not neighborhood concern, not confusion. A coordinated campaign to drive me out. A vendetta. That week, Karen Sparrow was arrested. Karen's arrest didn't make the evening news, but it might as well have set off fireworks in Lake Harmony. The HOA forum went dead silent overnight. No more posts about community safety. No new blurry photos. No thinly veiled accusations. For the first time in months, it felt like someone had finally pulled the plug on her megaphone. And when word spread that she'd been charged with filing false police reports and defamation, the shift was palpable. A few of her staunchest defenders deleted their posts. Some residents even sent me handwritten notes apologizing for the misunderstandings. It was damage control, but I appreciated the gesture. At her arraignment, Karen showed up in pearls and pastels like she was going to a brunch, not standing trial. She pleaded not guilty, of course, her lawyer arguing she acted in good faith out of concern for community safety. But the judge wasn't buying it. With 9 police calls traced back to her, plus a published article full of lies, her intent was clear. Still, it was her first offense, and this was suburban America, where appearances still carry weight. So she walked out with 6 months probation, a hefty fine, and a restraining order that forbade her from initiating contact with me or stepping foot within 100 feet of my property line. But Karen Sparrow wasn't the type to let legal documents stop her. She didn't shout or scheme out loud anymore. No, her retaliation got quieter, dirtier, and far more invasive. It started small. I noticed someone had cut the wiring on one of my motion sensors at the edge of the dock. The camera caught nothing. A few nights later, I found a rock embedded in one of my newly planted garden beds. On it, crudely scrawled in black marker, "Lake belongs to all." I replaced the sensor in the camera. I tossed the rock. I didn't react because that's what she wanted, but I logged it. I logged everything. Then things escalated. One morning, just after sunrise, I stepped onto the dock with a cup of coffee and stopped cold. The entire left side of the pier was scorched. Blackened boards, charred debris, and ashes floating in the water like paper snowflakes. Someone had tried to set fire to my dock during the night. The flames hadn't reached the house, thank God, but it was deliberate. A few feet away, I found melted plastic, likely a cheap lighter, and traces of gasoline. The cameras facing that angle had been disabled, cleanly, precisely. Later that day, I found my perimeter fence slashed in 2 places, like someone had tried to crawl through without triggering the gate sensors. The gate lock had been tampered with. One of my cameras was smashed and tossed into the lake. My stomach turned when I discovered spray paint on the rear side of the boathouse, written in jagged, erratic lettering, "Give the lake back." This was no longer petty harassment. This was calculated vandalism, possibly arson. And the message was clear. Someone was still watching me, still furious, still trying to drive me out by force. But it wasn't until the police interviewed 2 local teenagers caught loitering behind my property that the pieces finally clicked into place. The boys, barely 16, were caught trying to sneak through my back gate. When questioned, one of them spilled everything, said a community representative gave them a key and told them they'd be helping restore public access to a place that should have never been sold off. They were promised a small volunteer grant for their time. He even had a laminated badge labeled Lake Harmony Volunteer Patrol. When the officers showed me a photo of the badge, I nearly laughed. It had Karen's signature. She'd been using a go-between, someone from her circle, to recruit teenagers to commit acts of trespass and sabotage, all while she played the innocent citizen on probation. She thought she was clever. She thought layering her actions through others would protect her. She was wrong. When the officers came to take Karen in the second time, there were no niceties, no warnings, and certainly no room for misunderstanding. It was early afternoon when 2 squad cars pulled up in front of her pristine Lake Harmony home, blue and red lights flickering silently like a judgment passed. I didn't witness it myself, but I heard about it within the hour. Apparently she was gardening when they arrived, kneeling among her hydrangeas with clippers in hand like nothing in the world could touch her. She didn't speak a word as they cuffed her, just stood there, back rigid, lips pressed into a tight line, while the neighbors watched from their porches in stunned silence. The charges this time were serious: conspiracy to commit vandalism, criminal mischief, destruction of private property, tampering with surveillance systems, contributing to the delinquency of minors, and, most damning of all, violation of the conditions of her probation. Her restraining order had been clear: no contact, no interference, no proximity. But giving underage boys keys to my gate and instructing them to destroy my cameras, that was interference in its purest, most prosecutable form. I was called down to the sheriff's office that same day. Detective Harlan, who'd been assigned to the case after the dock fire, briefed me on everything. "We've matched the prints on the lighter to one of the kids," he said, and he claims Karen handed him the key herself. Says she called it community service. The second boy's story lines up exactly, and that fake volunteer badge, designed by her. There's a print match from her home computer. It's airtight. I asked the one question that had been gnawing at me. Why? What was she hoping to accomplish? Harlan exhaled and leaned back in his chair. Control. She doesn't see your land as yours. She sees it as territory that slipped through her fingers. She thinks she's protecting the lake, even if she has to break the law to do it. And she genuinely believes the rules don't apply to her. By the end of the week, Karen Sparrow was officially booked at the county jail. No bail this time. Her probation was revoked immediately, and a new criminal case was opened. The assistant district attorney handling the matter wasn't pulling punches. They were stacking the charges, felony counts where applicable, enhancement for recruiting minors, property damage well into 5 figures. It was no longer a neighborhood nuisance case. This was now a full-blown prosecution. I wasn't done either. My legal team filed an updated civil suit against both Karen and the Lake Harmony HOA, citing gross negligence and enabling behavior. While the board tried to claim ignorance, emails surfaced. Karen had been using her official HOA email address to coordinate community patrols, and several members had seen her plans, even commented on them. One wrote, "Are you sure this is a good idea, Karen? It could backfire." No one stopped her. That made them complicit. The court granted us discovery access, and soon enough, we had internal memos, HOA meeting transcripts, even voicemail recordings from Karen bragging about reclaiming the shoreline. I sat in court as her voice played over the speakers, calm, smug, certain. "I don't care what the county line says. That dock should belong to Lake Harmony. He'll get tired and leave like they all do." But I wasn't going anywhere. At the pretrial hearing, Karen looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. Her trademark confidence was gone, replaced by tightly folded hands and darting eyes. When the judge listed the charges aloud, she didn't flinch. But when he denied bail and ordered her held until trial, I saw the tremor in her jaw. The collapse had begun. And so had the reckoning. The courtroom was packed on the first day of the trial. Locals showed up in quiet waves, slipping into benches with curious, cautious expressions. Some were Lake Harmony residents, people who had once stood behind Karen or had kept silent while she waged her personal war. Now they were spectators to the unraveling of the empire she'd built out of fear, manipulation, and HOA letterhead. Karen sat stiffly between her lawyers, a beige suit drowning her frame like a shroud. Her signature blonde bob had dulled, and she avoided eye contact with everyone, especially me. The smugness was gone. What replaced it was something quieter, panic maybe, or disbelief that her narrative had finally collapsed under the weight of actual law. The prosecution wasted no time. They laid it all out in opening arguments. The false 911 calls, the defamatory blog post, the smear campaign dressed as community concern. Then came the second act, her escalation. The vandalism, the arson attempt on my dock, the slashed fences, the spray-painted threats. But the knockout blow was saved for last. The recruited minors. 2 teenage boys, now testifying under subpoena, took the stand and told the court exactly how Karen gave them fake badges, cash incentives, and verbal instructions to restore community access by sabotaging my land. The phrase, "He's an intruder, not a neighbor," echoed in the courtroom like a confession. My attorney, Rachel Kim, delivered our side with the precision of a scalpel. She introduced every police report, every screenshot, every piece of video evidence we'd accumulated since day one. She called HOA board members to the stand, some defensive, others remorseful, and exposed a string of emails that showed Karen had been warned internally, but never stopped. Rachel then pivoted to our civil claims: defamation, emotional distress, property damage, legal costs, and HOA liability for enabling her campaign. When I was called to testify, I spoke plainly. I didn't embellish, didn't grandstand. I told the jury how I'd inherited the land, how I tried to keep to myself, how the harassment turned from words into actions. I told them about waking up to find my dock burned, my fence sliced open, and threats scrawled on my boathouse. And I told them what it felt like to live under constant surveillance, not from the government, but from a woman who believed the lake belonged to her more than the law. Karen's defense tried to pivot, arguing that she acted with the community's best interest in mind, that she had a moral duty to protect Lake Harmony's character, but the jury didn't buy it. There's a fine line between stewardship and sabotage, and she'd leapt across it with both feet. After 4 days of testimony, deliberation took less than 6 hours. The verdict: guilty on all criminal counts. 3 years in state prison, no possibility of parole for the first 18 months. Violation of probation, conspiracy to commit vandalism, and reckless endangerment involving minors. As for the civil suit, the judge awarded me $950,000 in damages, covering emotional distress, repair costs, legal fees, and punitive compensation. But the ruling didn't stop there. The court issued a permanent injunction against Karen and the Lake Harmony HOA, declaring my property an independent, exempt estate with no affiliation, current or future, with the HOA. Any future attempts by Lake Harmony to assert control, regulate, contact, or otherwise interfere with my property would result in automatic fines and contempt proceedings. I walked out of that courtroom not just vindicated, but fireproof. Karen's reach had been cut off at the root, and she, finally, was done. The air felt different after the trial, lighter somehow, like the lake itself had taken a breath it had been holding since the day I arrived. The silence that followed Karen's sentencing was the kind of silence I'd moved here for in the first place. No patrol cars creeping down the gravel, no HOA flyers on my gate, no sideways stares from joggers pretending not to notice me. Just wine through pine, bird song, and the lap of water against my rebuilt dock. And yes, the dock was rebuilt. I made sure of it. With the settlement funds, I hired a local carpenter, an older guy named Mason who had grown up in these woods before Lake Harmony had ever been drawn on a zoning map. We tore out the scorched boards together, salvaged what we could, and crafted something sturdier, wider, and better than before. I added a covered bench near the end, where you could sit in the shade with a coffee in the morning or a cold beer at dusk, a place meant for reflection, not conflict. On the shore, right where the old gravel trail met the gate, I posted a new sign. Simple black letters on polished cedar: "This shoreline is private property. HOA does not live here. Neither does Karen." It didn't need to say more. But on the bench where Karen had once tried to reclaim power through trespass and fire, I left something more poetic. A brass plaque, carefully etched, mounted into the backrest. For rest, not for rule. In memory of Karen Sparrow, HOA President 2016-2025. I wasn't angry anymore, just tired and done. Neighbors from Lake Harmony eventually started waving again, some out of courtesy, some out of shame. A few even came by in person. One woman brought cookies. A man named Tom, who'd quietly testified against Karen during the trial, shook my hand and thanked me for standing your ground when the rest of us were too scared. I didn't need the praise, but I accepted it. Sometimes quiet victories speak loudest. There were no more volunteer patrols, no secret meetings, no teenage saboteurs pretending to be guardians of the public good. The HOA restructured, renamed, and moved on. But my 6 acres, they remained exactly what they'd always been. Mine. I'd won my peace the hard way, and now, at last, I could sit at the end of my dock, feet dangling just above the water, watching the sunset ripple across the lake. No HOA, no watchers. Just me, my land, and the wind, exactly as it was meant to be. In the months that followed, people started calling me things I never set out to become. The guy who beat the HOA. The lake rights guy. Even once. The anti-Karen crusader. It was strange. I hadn't set out to prove anything to anyone. I hadn't planned to stand in a courtroom or to wage a war over land I already owned. All I ever wanted was peace, a quiet place to live, and the simple dignity of not being harassed by someone who believed rules bent around her personal vision of order. But it turns out, when you push back against that kind of delusion, when you draw a line, hold it, and refuse to be intimidated, people notice, they remember. And some of them find the courage to do the same. A few months after Karen's sentencing, a small regional paper ran a story about the case. The headline read, "Lake Homeowner Defends Rights, Exposes HOA Overreach." It wasn't sensational, just factual. But it traveled through forums, newsletters, Reddit threads, even homeowner rights blogs. Soon, I was fielding emails from strangers across the country. People told me about their own Karen stories, HOAs fining them for native plants, forbidding veterans from flying flags, banning children's chalk drawings, all these small tyrannies disguised as order. I wasn't a lawyer or a public figure, but I knew how to document, how to stay calm, how to stand my ground, and so I started writing back, sharing what worked, How to fight back without losing your mind or your house. Eventually, I turned my experience into a guide, part journal, part legal checklist. I called it Lines on the Lawn: Standing Your Ground Against HOA Abuse. It was never meant to be more than a PDF passed around quietly, but it found its way into forums, attorney inboxes, even a town hall in Arizona. That part surprised me most. Not that people needed help, but how desperate they were for someone to tell them the law could still protect the little guy. And maybe that's the real takeaway. Karen didn't fall because I yelled louder. She didn't lose because I had more power or money. She lost because she forgot a simple truth. Owning a clipboard doesn't make you a sheriff. And personal belief, no matter how loudly shouted, doesn't override actual law. The lake is still quiet now. I like it that way. But every so often, when I sit on my dock and hear the wind stir through the trees, I smile at the thought that somewhere, someone's drawing a line of their own and finally refusing to move it.